Hello, Dolly. This is the focus group.
They're all business, except when they're not. It's the focus group with Tim Bennett and John Nash.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the focus group. Tim Bennett here, as always, with my good friend and co-host, Mr. John T. Nash, back from a cycling adventure.
In Spain.
Be sure to catch us here every Wednesday, but we know most of you time shift. You can catch our audio release of this show on Saturdays and find out all about us, including our podcast, Unbuttoned, at focusgroupradio.com. You'll also find our sponsors there, including Deep Discount is a sponsor of ours here on the focus group. Be sure to click on them and shop away for some great deals and get some of your holiday shopping done early. Hello, Mr. Nash.
I am back from Girona, Spain, and it was a great trip, but I'm definitely a bit jet lagged because your opening took me a second to process, and listeners will know what I mean when we get to that part, but then I processed it and I bust out laughing while the intro was playing, so you can't hear me laughing, but well done, Tim.
Well, you have to try to make them, I think, you make them cryptic. Chris Matthews used to just always say something obscure that's where we got it from, right? When he would do this thing and be like, what is he talking about? And then you listen and find out about it. So Hello, Dolly refers to one of our stories coming up.
Yeah, and you're going to love it because Tim just took it away. So on our Unbuttoned podcast earlier in the week, Tim and I were talking about some of the experiences I had on my cycling trip in Girona. And I now did, in fact, find the quote that this guy said to me. So I'm riding up a mountain and with a man named Dave and his wife, Bonnie, super sweet couple from Colorado. And as we get to the top, Dave commented on how it seemed like a Colorado ski town. And he said, and in fact, I wonder if it's like them. I said, what do you mean? He goes, let me tell you. He goes, out in some of those towns, if you're single, people often say, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. That you're going to...
The odds are good, but
good,
the goods are odd.
The goods are odd. If you're
God, that's perfect.
Yeah, it is. It is. I had
to write that down.
I had to find it. Yeah, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. And you know what I'm talking about, Tim. We have friends out in those towns, right?
Oh, yeah. Everyone's got a story, and then some story, and then a story on top of that. That was always like my favorite one about the bars. They were a 2 at 10 and a 10 at 2.
Good from afar, far from good.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Or better. What was the other one? The famous Mae West quote.
What'd she say?
It's better to be looked over than overlooked.
I love little language tricks like that, right?
Yeah,
Lots of fun.
It's better to be looked over than overlooked.
Overlooked, yeah.
Yeah. So you had a nice trip, and
I did. But you warned me, and you didn't warn me. You just said you remember your travel. So when you come from Europe back in our direction, I think it's more brutal to deal with the time change. And now and then I have these moments where I literally just stop and I'm like, what was I doing? I had to review in my head. I was like, oh, it's jet lag. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, it was. I remember I worked with a guy that flew in from Minnesota to Chicago. On the same time zone, by the way, and missed a meeting in the morning because he said he had jet lag. I said, that's not the way it works. You don't fly.
Did he really try
you
to
don't
get
take a
away with that?
25-minute flight from Minneapolis to Chicago and claim jet lag. Oh yeah, no,
really?
I had jet lag. Sorry, I overslept. I had jet lag. I said, where'd you come from? I said, aren't you in Minnesota? He's like, yeah. I said, it's the same time zone. It's a 25-minute flight. I did it back and forth a million times. I had jet lag. Okay. That's not how it works. Usually there's a time zone change and a distance. You'll love that. Jet lag.
That's a good one. You got a lot of those guys trying to pull the wool over your eyes when you're doing that.
Oh, yeah. You've heard it all. You hear it all. I was watching on a TikTok. This is gross, but it was one of these cops things I got sucked down the rabbit hole with. And the woman was pulled over for DUI in Arkansas. And she says to the police officer, I need to use the bathroom. And he says, nope, you gotta, you're gonna get out here and you're gonna stand on one foot and put your finger on your nose or whatever. And she kept fighting with the cop, and finally she just pulled her pants down, took a dump right there on the side of the road. I couldn't believe it. I'm watching it, and then And then she takes off, and the cops running after her. She's screaming, her pants are down around her ankle.
Why do people do this? I mean, the dump is bad enough. Taking off with their panties around her ankles, right?
Well, they said that the police, they said, someone's like, God bless police officers. And they said, and then some other comments, the comments sections in those things are always the best. Like, well, she warned him. She said she had to go to the bathroom. But yeah, so I don't know how we got on that.
Well, we because we were talking about the odds are good and the goods are odd and all these funny little workarounds. But on the subject of being a police officer, I agree with you. I mean, I do think it's a very hard job for this precise reason. They train for so many different things, but they don't necessarily train for someone taking a dump on the street, right?
No, I'm sure they've heard it all and seen it all, right?
Yep.
You see that, and I get frustrated when I watch some of these things, which I'm sure Chinese bots are sending my way. People that are stealing out of the stores or.
Yeah.
I saw this thing the other night on 60 Minutes. I don't know, the Five Eyes, the 5 countries that we share intelligence with most often with, which is UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And they were talking about the amount of cyber warfare that's going on from just China. And they said, they said it usurps all countries combined. They said the amount of things being stolen. And they said not just from large organizations or from large tech firms or something or military. They said they'd go out at a small mom and pop. They just want to collect data and just keep collecting and see what they could learn. And so these five big allies of ours, which Churchill started back around World War II to share information, were very concerned. For the first time, they held their first meeting ever as a group publicly in California to talk about this. So it's kind of scary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and they were talking about manipulation of elections and how you can just, based upon what you watch, they can send you certain things to get you tuned up. And
that's the thing. This is the part that really just gets me. Like, I read the paper, you read the Times, you read, I don't feel I'm being manipulated by the New York Times, although I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people who would say I've been manipulated and brainwashed. I'm a lefty. I'm a libtard, whatever. It just seems like good reporting to me. And when I read an article in the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal that's similar, I'm like, okay, the facts are the facts. But if you're getting your news off Facebook,
Facebook,
or Twitter,
or TikTok, or Instagram, or Twitter, right?
And Twitter's a big old dumpster fire these days, right?
X, I guess.
Called X. Talk about the worst. I believe that he has driven that company's value down in half by now. There was an article recently that someone said, well, he took it over and he's running to the ground.
Well, there's so many companies that won't even use it anymore. If you go to their pages, Subaru, for one of them, I went and looked. They've not posted anything since he took it over, since Musk took it over. And there's a number of organizations that have refused to spend money on the platform because they say it's not monitored.
So here's a question for you. The woman who took over as CEO, Yakovina, I forget what but she used to be one of the heads of sales at like NBC Universal. Right. You go from one of the biggest content companies, right? In a respected job. She was loved. Everybody said she was a great businesswoman. You drop yourself into Elon Musk's Twitter, X, and he's off shooting his mouth saying what he ever wants to say. Meanwhile, external people are saying hate speech has gone up geometrically on the platform. I didn't think you could deny it all you want, but I think that there's probably good research that shows that. And she's trying to woo back advertisers. I mean, big companies to come back to a platform where their ad could pop up next to anything, right? Like, how do you even say that was a good career move?
No. Well, the sad part about all this, as you know, is back in the day when we would run interstitials or we would run advertorials in the USA Today or Wall Street Journal or something, it all had to be
marked.
And codified. You had to let people know this is an advertisement, or this is paid for by the company. And in order to run even a TV commercial, you have to have substantial third-party data to make any claims that you say. And social media we've allowed to just run amok. And I think that's what's happened globally. They said it's not just here. They said it's worldwide. What's happened with social media by just allowing it to run amok. And there's no fact checking. There's no guardrails. And so if you take advantage, if you're a country like China, that as we're all competitors on the global stage, and you find a weak link there because they control, the Chinese control all of the media coming in and out. They talked about how the different feed you would get on TikTok in China versus what our kids get. And theirs is all about education and learning, and ours is all about kind of fluffy nonsense.
Cats on Roombas.
Yeah. So anyway, save the world, right, John?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So hey, what caught your eye this week?
What caught your eye? Here's what Tim and John found.
What caught my eye, I think you're going to find completely predictable. It's another one of these finds, right?
Uh-oh.
So one of the original model builders from the movie Star Wars, and we're talking about when they would use actual practical, models for practical effects and shooting. There was a certain amount of these starfighters called the X-wing starfighter that were built for Star Wars. It's about a 20-inch long model. There's a number of them that had been floating around. ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's special effects company up in San Francisco area, had most of these in their archive, but a couple were missing, and they weren't. They had enough of these that they weren't worried about it. But this particular model came from the collection of Oscar-nominated model maker Greg Gine. And it was auctioned off this past, about a week and a half ago, for the crazy sum of $3.135 million at Heritage Auction in Dallas. It was thought to be lost, and it was found in a box when Greg Gine passed away. They went through all his stuff, and they found this particular model, one of the missing X-wing fighters, in a box in his garage. And it says here, built by Industrial Light and Magic for Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, the Red Leader, Red 1, X-Wing, is one of the just 4 hero, in quotes, hero filming miniatures with articulating servo-controlled wings and lights. According to the auction description, hero models were built for close-ups, etc. This model has not been displayed or modified since it left ILM. So that would be 1976. It went into a box. Wow. VXF historian Gene Kazicki told The Hollywood Reporter, for those of us that grew up in the 70s or 80s and those of us that work in visual effects, this model is as significant as a find as the Ruby Slippers or the Maltese Falcon. And I agree with them. I mean, this is one of those props, right? This model has not been displayed or modified. As I said, he noted there were stories of hero models that were unaccounted for when ILM moved. So they used to be down in the Los Angeles area. Then George Lucas moved them up to San Francisco, and some models went missing then. We never could confirm anything. He said, but then when Greg Gine's family reached out to him because they were starting to find things in boxes, he helped them catalog it, and then they came across the X-Wing Starfighter, and here we go. Someone is now the proud owner of that artifact for, as I said, $3.135 million.
Do you think a museum or somebody bought it, or do you think it was just a fan?
It doesn't say who, but the Times also ran a piece about this, and I'm gonna see if this came from Variety or the Hollywood Reporter. I should look to see if they did in fact announce who got it, because I agree with you, Tim. Like a museum would have picked it up, but that's an awful lot for a museum to spend on a sign, like a model like that, right?
Yeah, unless it was a specialized, maybe a toy museum or a science fiction museum. I saw this headline, and I thought maybe it might have been one of the model kits. And I thought, oh, John probably has one of these.
I did. Not this one, though.
But I was wondering, so it actually was one of the props that they used in
filming.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it's amazing what some of these things will go for. If you had the money, would you buy it? If $3 million to you was kind of like $30.
Oh yeah, but I'm not sure I would buy it, because then you have to insure it, and I don't know. But Tim, you bring up an interesting point about all this stuff. Like when I was younger, having a piece of a movie was important to me. It didn't have to be an original prop, but that's why I would buy scale model kits or action figures or something, because it felt like I had a piece of the story. Now at my current age, I'm not so sure I'd care about that as much, if that makes sense. Like if you're a huge Wizard of Oz fan and you had to have the Ruby Slippers, right?
Right.
And let's say you have them for like 20 years and they're sitting in a little plexiglass thing. 20 years later, do you care? I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm with you. I've gotten that way as well, as some of those sort of things just kind of go off to the side more than they meant maybe 30 years ago or something.
That's a good way of putting it. It's no longer the center of attention. It's somewhere off, and therefore it's not quite as compelling.
Yeah. So what caught my eye was, and I opened with "Hello, Dolly," but this is reference to a funeral home worker who robbed a dead man's house for his life-size sex doll.
So this, I love your headline. Man collects dead body, okay, and gets smitten with a sex doll he spots at the corner. So he was actually this guy was actually picking up a corpse, right?
Right. So funeral home worker, he was busted for allegedly having sex with a life-size sex doll that he found in the apartment of a deceased person. So Ryan Smith is his name, poor thing, 41 years old. He's been slapped with charges of burglary, criminal trespassing, and tampering with physical evidence last week. He was fired from his Nebraska county job. Investigators say Smith and a colleague were dispatched last week to a home in Omaha to collect the body of a deceased person. And so he worked for this company called Mid-America First Call. They remove and transport bodies for cremation. So they said they'd gone in to collect the body, and Smith allegedly took a shine to a life-size doll that he found in the apartment, according to court records. So they said the dead body was near this life-size doll. Now, some said it was further in the room. This other story says the body was the dead body was near the sex doll. So police allege that Smith then called, after they bring the dead deceased to the crematorium, Ryan Smith decides he called the property manager and claimed that the local sheriff asked him to remove the sex doll because he wanted to swab it for a biopsy. So the owner of the bizarre request, the property manager, is like, not going to happen. So when he got turned down, he broke into the apartment, and the property manager started hearing noises coming from inside, and they went to the apartment of the deceased, and the door was locked and deadbolted with a chain, and banging on the door, and they said a disheveled Smith emerged from the unit. And he declared he'd be back to return with a warrant for the doll. He was in checking on the doll, he told the property manager. So the property manager backfired, immediately called the police, and Smith was arrested on burglary charges. They said post-arrest examination, they revealed that the doll was sticky. And it appeared to have something rubbed on her inner thighs. They'd say it was a girl doll. So the doll was sticky, and there appeared to be something, in quotes, that had been rubbed on her inner thigh. The sheriff's office now has the doll, and they're processing it for DNA.
Wait a minute. What town did this come out of again?
Omaha, Nebraska. So after arriving at the scene, they also said they noticed several items in the unit had been moved around in the apartment, but they're planning this DNA sample. Subsequently, poor Ryan's been fired from his job at Mid-America First Call of collecting the bodies. But yeah, so he was quite smitten with the sex doll when he came in, and then decided to come investigate. And so there you go.
Where did this pop up in your news reading?
You'll laugh. It was CNN.
CNN.
And it was another one of those where I'm like, So you start typing and you start Googling and looking. And then, of course, it floods. The feed floods. And some of them are, the New York Post is the most sensational. You know, they have all kinds of funny language. And then there's the very straightforward, factual, just the facts, man, with CNN or something. And then the Daily Mirror or the Guardian or somebody over in England usually picks it up and runs a scandal sheet. And I laughed because the picture that's here, this is not what the guy looks like, but this was the picture that accompanied the story, which I thought was hilarious.
Again, an editor or someone on staff is like, let's do this picture.
I could see you going through the list of of images. Let's do this one here. This
one works for us.
Looks like a Austin Powers son with a beach ball with a head on it or something.
I just can't believe, like, sometimes you and I find wacky stuff, and like you, if the headline is too crazy, I think, is it The Onion? Is this a trick? And then it pops up in like multiple things, and you'll find the original source. You're like, oh, okay, it's real.
Yeah,
crazy.
All right, yeah. So that was our story this week. The what we do every week here is we have what we call our business birthday, Mr. Nash.
Everyone does celebrity birthday greetings, but the Focus Group is the only show in the universe that celebrates business birthdays.
I was poking
Tough
around.
week?
This was a tough week, and although there was I'll save it for another time, another show. But this was a tough week. I was wondering whether I looked through our archives because we've had 15 years of these business birthdays. I did not find this. Now, we may have done it before, but John Francis Dodge, born
Yeah,
October 25th.
Came up. I don't remember it. Yeah.
1864. He died at 55. He was so John Francis Dodge, as you would guess, Dodge automobile.
Mm-hmm.
So he's one of the manufacturers, pioneers of the Dodge automobile, along with his brother Horace, was co-founder of the Dodge brothers. They were born in Michigan, Niles, Michigan, and they worked at a foundry and a machine shop. That's where they got their training from. He and his brother were very close in business as children and as adults. The family had moved to Detroit in 1886, and they worked for a machinist in Canada. And John was more the sales-minded, who's the business birthday, was a sales-minded person. Horace was more the gifted mechanic and tinkerer. And they came up with this bearing system that they invented in 1897, ended up patented, this bearing system, and they were using it for bicycling, and the manufacturers of bicycles for these bearings. They were dirt-proof bearings, ball bearings. And so that's where they had their original claim to fame, and money came from the bicycle manufacturing. They sold the business in 1900 and used the proceeds to open up another machine shop in Detroit, and actually were supplying parts to Henry Ford, the Ford Motor Company, and as well as the Olds Motor Company, which later became Oldsmobile. And so they won contracts to build transmissions, build chassis, engine parts, and so forth. And they were so successful in 1910, they ended up opening a plant just to service the automobile industry. So for 10 years, they were in business with Ford Motor Company as a lead supplier. And they ended up leaving in 1913, 1914 to develop their own line of automobiles. They got very frustrated with Henry Ford. They said he refused to modernize the Model T and refused to make larger engines and improve on the automobile. And they said Henry Ford was a weird one. They asked him to produce a larger engine car, and Henry Ford's response was, "I would never produce a 6-cylinder engine because the world had no use for a motor that had more cylinders than a cow has teats."
You know the generation this crowd came from, right?
Right. So they said that they felt he could be very unreasonable. They also, the other thing with Henry Ford, I never heard this before, they said he was notoriously cheap, didn't pay his bills. They said he was supposed to pay cash for all of his chassis and differentials and frames that the Dodges delivered. And they said he was always claiming he was short of money and he would pay them other ways or pay them when the car sold. And they did agree in some cases to get Ford Motor stock, which turned out to be a good thing because it ended up being worth millions when they finally sold it to open up their own Dodge Automobile Company. So they started building motor trucks in the U.S. in October 1917, during World War I. They provided Dodge trucks for the U.S. military, and then ended up also producing cars after the war. They said that he had a temper. He was socially unacceptable. And the well-heeled elite did not like him in Detroit. This is John Francis Dodge.
Well, look at the picture, Tim. He's got kind of a stern schoolmarm, like, you cross me, I'm going to hit you with a switch.
Yeah, apparently he was a ginger too, redhead. So they said that he was influential member and very involved in the Republican Party. He married a Canadian woman. I don't know why they had to say she was Canadian, but he married a Canadian woman. He divorced her and secretly married his housekeeper. Then she died, and he divorced her and then married another woman, and then ended up in a fourth marriage. So he must have been a bastard, right, to live with, I'm guessing.
Or he couldn't cook.
He his daughter from his final marriage ended up being quite the equestrian and owned Meadowbrook farms in Michigan, and also Castleton Farms in Lexington, Kentucky, which was very involved in thoroughbred racing.
I was going to say it's horses, horse racing. Yeah.
Yeah. So he and his brother both contracted influenza and pneumonia while in New York City during the 1918 flu pandemic.
Oh.
And in 1920, John he died at 55 at the Ritz-Carlton, and is buried in Detroit's Woodlawn Cemetery.
I love the quote you had to accompany his picture. Someday, people who own a Ford are going to want an automobile.
Yeah, yeah, they did not leave. That's the mix on words. The two widows of both brothers that had died within 2 years ended up selling the Dodge Automobile Company for then, in 1925, $146 million, which in 2021 dollars would be the equivalent of $1.8 billion.
Not bad. Good. Yeah. I think it would be a good business move. They had no intention of running the company, right?
No. Well, the fourth wife too. Can you imagine? So, yeah. So happy birthday, Mr. John Francis Dodge. October 25th.
I don't believe we've done that birthday before. I think we've talked about some of the other automakers that were around when Ford was making the Model T and introducing Americans to the notion of individual ownership of cars, and other people had ideas about engines. And Tim, there was a car that used something called, remember the Wankel engine?
The Wankel?
Remember it was this odd shaped thing that it was supposed to be a revolutionary way for the main shaft to get power or something.
I know the Mazda had a rotary engine, and the Subaru and Porsche had the flat boxer engines.
This is called the Wankel rotary engine. Is a type of internal combustion engine using an eccentric rotary design to convert pressure into rotating motion.
Does it say who used it? Did you look at it?
The concept was invented and proven by German engineer Felix Wankel, and the commercially feasible engine designed by German engineer Hans Dieter Paschke. Why do I think that might have ended up in Porsche or something?
Yeah,
is that possible?
It could have. Porsche ended up using Porsche and Subaru. They're actually aircraft engines. After World War II, when they were both told when they lost the war that they couldn't make airplanes anymore, they modified these engines for cars. And but quite frankly, we've said this before, you could put a propeller on a Subaru engine with very little modification to fly light aircraft. You do the same with a Porsche flat boxer engine as well. And the emblem of the BMW, the blue and white circle emblem is propeller.
Really?
Yeah. So that's why the Germans and Japanese have done so well with cars.
Because they
weren't allowed to make airplanes anymore. So they changed all their airplane factories after the war to they were updated for cars. Okay. And we, there's some benefits to the war for them.
We got to be careful when you say that.
But look at the industry. The German and Japanese auto industries our industry still struggles a bit. But they seem to have done well. But they had modernization and did not have to make airplanes like we had to. So our shop talk this week, Mr. Nash, is I think you found this one, didn't you?
Yeah.
The headline is, I saw thousands of bank account details as a teller. It taught me 3 lessons millions never learn. And so it was interesting. And I often thought about this when I would go to the bank with a check or something, or, when we would sometimes get these checks from companies where we might hold the money to buy media. So it looked like there was this huge influx of cash and then it goes right out when you buy media. But it was talking about how these tellers can often tell a lot about people and learn a lot. And this one teller had worked for 16 years, and she came up with 3 things that she felt she learned over the years of seeing thousands of bank accounts. And was sharing them. She said it was a very great lesson to learn the hard way of whether how wealth signifies or how wealth identifies people or doesn't. And so I thought it was a pretty interesting piece. What was the first one that she noted?
Before I jump into the first one, I just thought that the intro of the article was actually in some ways a little more fascinating than the 3 steps, because she brought to mind something that I don't think of often, which is when you go up to the teller and you're asking for money or depositing something, sometimes people make small talk or whatever.
Right.
But the minute they call up your account, every transaction for the last 20-some days is in front of them, right?
Right.
So she talks about how people came in with expensive clothing or Gucci bags or whatever, and she's looking at their bank accounts, and they might not have two pennies to rub together, yet they're walking around with the Christian Dior, whatever that thing is.
Or they're overdrawn, right?
Or they're overdrawn, or they're complaining about being overdrawn because they never overdraw their account, but she's looking at the account and there's never enough money in there to begin with. So it just struck me that there's this little theater of, and this is where she gets into some of the stuff that it's posturing on some levels. So her first thought was, and she started as a teller at the age of 16, and she worked for several years in the banking industry, as Tim said earlier. So she, at that age, at 16, you do get a good, interesting glimpse into this. So her first thing is expensive possessions do not signify wealth. And she said, what I would see as a teller over and over again was that a high percentage of the people wearing the flashy designer belts or handbags dotted with the brand's logo often had the smallest bank accounts. The people driving luxury cars were often those who were financially secure just as much as they were those whose bank accounts were often negative or on the brink of negative. In other words, there was little to no correlation between expensive objects and wealth. She said sometimes newly funded founders, if you were like a founder of a company and you just got some VO cash, had a tendency to spend money on splashy office spaces, furniture, and technology, when in fact the people that would audit that kind of thing would look at it and say, they would quietly say they don't need all this stuff. It's just for show.
Right.
And that part reminded me of when you guys used to shop for ad agencies and you're the president of Subaru used to walk into an ad agency and say, we're paying for all this, right?
Yeah, which was an odd thing for me. That was the financial people would often say that. You'd walk in and see these magnificent offices on Madison Avenue or in some of these locales we'd go to in Chicago or something. And they would literally walk in and say, well, this is where your money's going.
Yep.
And I've always remembered that.
And I think when you told me that lesson, it was I remember exactly when you told it to me, and you actually mentioned some of the agencies that they made that comment about. It really struck me, and I thought, because what struck me most about that was the flip side is where I thought things were at, which is if you're an agency owner or partner, you want to showcase and make it look great, but
Success, right?
in doing so, you run the risk of making it look like your billings are actually going to things like expensive, Noguchi coffee tables and artwork on the wall, right?
Yeah, no, very much so. I often wondered about that, and then it reminded me of the book, The Millionaire Next Door.
Oh, yeah,
which
live below your means,
right, and don't have that financial stress. Number two, where credit cards are not a tool to buy things you can't afford, and one of the things that she mentions here is that she felt the key was to only use a credit card as if you would use a debit card. And in other words, try to pay off your balance each month so that you're not using the credit card to afford things you really can't afford and then paying the high interest rates. I mean, it's a pretty obvious thing. But I know people that purposely will just keep getting cards and rack them up to the max. And I would be stressed out if that happened.
Same here. Yeah.
But a lot of the thought was, well, you might die tomorrow or something and enjoy life now and live on other people's money, right?
Let someone else pay the card. Yeah.
Yeah, live on everyone else's money. And so that was an interesting thing to me. But I remember, I think both you and I early on in our careers had the mistake of easy credit, because a lot of times when you got out of college with a degree, you were given a credit card. And if you needed suits or you needed clothes or you needed whatever, you can rack up the bill pretty quick, and then the interest just starts bang, bang, bang.
Right off the bat, yeah. And that was a lesson you and I learned early enough that we could correct the problem.
Yeah.
And not repeat it. I think out of that, as you said, one of my best things is if you could afford to pay it, if you could afford to buy it the day you're buying it, then it doesn't matter whether you use the credit card or not. And if you're using a card, you're smartly, hopefully, using it for rewards or points or something.
Right. Have another benefit. Yeah.
Yeah. And her last point in this article is good credit is not good enough. And as deceptive as that sounds, the way she says it is the point of having good credit is not simply to get a credit line and a loan approval, but to get it approved at the best rates. And the difference between good and very good can be the differences between thousands of dollars. So she has an example of you're taking out a 30-year mortgage, you have good credit, and you get a 1 percentage point difference in your interest rate. Well, that 1% point, if the person with very good credit got the better rate, over the course of their mortgage, they're saving sometimes, 125,000 to almost 500,000 over a 30-year period. That's a lot of money. I think actually I should read that again because I think 125 makes more sense of what they might save over a 30-year period. But that's a lot of money, right?
It's a lot of money. My frustration with this point, the good credit is not good enough, is not so much about getting the rates or whatever. It's whether they'll give you the rates depending upon your job, which is the next step to this. Because you and I have, or anybody who's self-employed knows how ridiculous it is to try to justify self-employed people and your financial statement, right?
Yeah.
And how it
you
works
have to go
if
through
you
hoops.
Right.
Yep.
And you could have, I had great credit rating and to get a mortgage and paid off my house, tried to get and the amount of aggravation I went through to try to get a mortgage with a 800 plus credit rating was ridiculous because I couldn't show consistent weekly income because I was self-employed. I'm thinking I'm not the only self-employed person looking for a loan. For a mortgage.
No.
And you've run into that as well.
You and I talked about this because we didn't use a mortgage broker when we did our last purchase upstate here in the city. We used a mortgage banker. And a mortgage banker apparently is different because they understand the nuances of self-employment. Right. So he was, I think you're right about this. Like you and I have had to submit profit and loan statements. We've had to submit invoices to clients and say this is being paid in 40 days and this is being paid in 60, just to show that you had income coming in. I mean, it's kind of crazy, right?
Right. So the great credit score didn't in that regard, I don't think, because there was still this ridiculousness of trying to figure out I guess where the money came from, but I don't know. I remember I was so aggravated with the bank. I said, yes, I'm a drug dealer in Miami. I bring drugs in. Because she wanted to know where the money was coming from. I said, we get paid quarterly. At that time, we got paid quarterly by our client.
Yep.
And I said, so you're going to see zero from January through May, probably. But then, X amount of money's coming in. So anyway.
I remember our mortgage banker said to me one day, he goes, here's the trick. You can go out and get a job and a W-2, use that first or second W-2 to get your mortgage, quit your job. Think about it, right? The bank's screaming at you, I want a W-2, I want to prove that you have a job somewhere, someone's paying you. You have all this money and receivables, you have a successful business, and he brought up the best point in the world. The hypocrisy is just, it's everywhere.
No, it's not. It's not easy if you're self-employed in this country, I think.
No. And then you have your accountant yell at you. Like when Tim and I were doing real estate stuff, Jack said, well, if I had known, we would have made you more bank ready or bank friendly. Remember that whole bank friendly thing? Like, what are you talking about? I'm friendly already.
Crazy. But anyway, that was a good story, I thought, because I didn't realize the piece that you had highlighted that I had skipped over in the front of, the teller does see all your transactions. You think you might just, and they're going to see where you spent your money or what you spent on credit cards or eating out or car payment or any of that stuff, right? So they see it all. So you can come up with a pretty good profile of somebody.
Yeah. And Tim, you and I could read those tea leaves too. One of our last clients, you're like, did you see how they spent the money? Did you see what they were showing us? And it turned out you were right about them. The ranch.
Needs to be a Broadway play.
That was a whole show.
Musical. Jukebox musical.
And Tim, But the song that will break out would be the You Killed the Puppy. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, folks, we want to thank you for joining us here on the Focus Group today. FocusGroupRadio.com is the website where you'll find all the information about the two of us, including our partners, and that would be Deep Discount here on the Focus Group. They've been with us for a long time. You can visit their site by going to ours, FocusGroupRadio.com, and clicking on their logo and start your shopping experience. We want to remind everybody who is out on the road, and most of you are driving, don't text and drive, arrive alive. Nothing more to say than that, except I always follow it up by saying, I see this all the time. It's crazy. The car swerves or into the rumble strip. Someone comes back, and inevitably they're looking at the phone. And it proves that you cannot look away for 2 seconds and read a text message, because it takes longer than that. So stay safe. We're going to see you next week, and have a good one.
It's The Focus Group with Tim Bennett and John Nash. Accessible on all platforms. Subscribe, like, and rate us on your platform of choice. Learn more at focusgroupradio.com.
That was a stunning focus group.